something unique about the highest becoming the lowest on the cross, in order that we, the lowest, might be brought into his hospitality. If the way of all nature is the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the weakest, the Christian story is the sacrifice of the fittest, Christ, so that we, the weakest, might survive. And I think whereas in the realm of nature it is tit for tat, in the realm of nature it is nature red in tooth and claw, there is something supernatural about the way of Christ. There's something against nature. There is something that says, I will protect the weakest. And obviously it was something that a critic of the church like Nietzsche hated. He saw the cross as the transvaluation of all values. Because, of course, nature teaches us that the weak, the low, and the botched should perish, and we shall help them to do so, he says in the Antichrist. And therefore Christians have always, he thought, stood in the way of a proper humanitarian ideal. And the proper humanitarian ideal is we can all fly off to become Übermensch. We can all fly off to greater heights of humanity if we let the poor, the weak, the low, and the botched, as he called them, perish so that we can, evolve to a higher degree. I think the revulsion that we feel at that sentiment is a particularly Christian revulsion, and it is born of some particularly Christian intuitions. I think we've been looking at a picture of the Lord on the cross for thousands of years, and we have held that up as our image of what it is to be great. And whoever will be greatest among you must serve, and the first shall be last, and all that kind of stuff that Jesus taught. I think we have been formed, whether we've been to church or not, all of us have been formed by an image of greatness in sacrifice, and even shameful sacrifice on the cross for the sake of the other, which I think gives a bite to a Christian understanding of compassion.
And how, just before we come back to Bart, was that, in your view, shown in practical ways by the early Christian church?
Hospitals, for instance, would be an interesting place to go. Now that the Greeks had their manuals of how Galen's four humours and how to be a physician and to help people, and the Romans had their sort of sick bays for the slaves and the soldiers, but that was to restore them to economic and military fruitfulness. The idea of hospitals for the weak and the poor and the sick who could not afford it became a very much a Christian thing that happened, and there was a cascade of hospitals that sort of happened from the 4th century onwards. Would be one kind of thing, or standing against abortion and infanticide, and not simply standing against abortion and infanticide, but taking the exposed infants and raising them in orphan care and that sort of thing. That would be another way of actually standing against the way of nature.
I mean, it's interesting, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Bart, that in those pagan cultures, it was legal essentially to abandon and expose, as it was called, infants who were unwanted economically, or because they were malformed or whatever it was. And as I understand it, Christians became to be known for people who would go to those places where they were traditionally left and took them in and adopted them and so on. For this is a part of a big picture that Glen believes goes back to this idea of the God who was willing to be sacrificed and kind of upheld the poor and the lowly and so on over the powerful. What's your view on that as being the kind of the linchpin for where this central virtue of compassion as a value came from in Western culture?
I've got two things to say about it. One is this is the one area of Glen's book that I completely agree with in most ways. I would put it differently. The way not contradictorily, just a different way. My different way of thinking about it is, I actually deal with this in this book that just came out with Yale about my journeys to the afterlife, because some of them deal with these issues and the issue is that in the Roman world generally, the ancient world generally, the world generally, the ideology was one of dominance. That whoever was dominant there were no ethical problems with a person who was dominating somebody. That's what they were supposed to do. And so a powerful village there was no ethical problem with destroying the village next door, killing all the men and enslaving all the women. There wasn't an ethical problem with that. Or empires. And so you can read through the moral discourses of Romans and Greeks, and they don't problematize that. They don't problematize slavery. Of course, I mean, the master is supposed to be master of the slave, and so slavery is fine. Yeah, of course. They're usually prisoners of war in the ancient world. It wasn't a race thing. It was just, you enslave people. And men were to dominate women economically, socially, culturally, politically, sexually. And so it was all domination, and Jesus preached service. And it was completely contrary to what the dominant paradigm was that you're to serve others and to live for and to help the poor. And that's when, in the ancient world, if you had a lot of money and if you had to give some away or you did give some away, it was always to somebody on your same socioeconomic class, or to build a public building, or to put on a gladiatorial show or something like it. It was for your own, to promote your own status. The idea of helping the poor was like unheard of. It's like, are you kidding me? That's a joke. No, you're not going to help the poor. And so I completely agree with that is a paradigm shift. It's not the case that everybody accepted the paradigm. A lot of Christians were going around saying, yeah, Jesus said to sell everything. He didn't really mean it. And so, you get a lot of that, and people are people. But you do get the shift in how preachers preached it.
For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to the Unbelievable podcast. And for more updates and bonus content, sign up to the Unbelievable newsletter.